Hi, I'm Lillian. Welcome back to my channel, Ink and Pages. Today I'm going to be talking through the best and worst and most disappointing and most surprising books I read in 2021. I want to finish this video on a positive note, which means I'm going to have to start on a negative one. So firstly, I'm going to talk about my most disappointing reads of last year. I unfortunately read quite a lot of 2-star books in 2021, which isn't like a bad rating. I use 2 stars to mean like it was fine, it was okay, but nothing particularly special, and I didn't particularly like it. So obviously it's not a bad rating. I consider it more of a neutral rating, but it is quite faint praise for books that I was hoping to really enjoy. And for the record, I can see why people would enjoy the next few books I'm going to talk about, because obviously I was hoping to enjoy them as well. I saw potential in them. It's just that for me, they did not fulfill that potential. So just in the order I read them, the first book I have to talk about is Number 9 Dream by David Mitchell. This was actually one of the very first books I read last year, and I thought I would like it because it's a David Mitchell book, and all 3 previous David Mitchell books I had read I did like. Ghostwritten, which I read most recently before this, ended up being my least favourite, but I still gave it 3 stars, because even though it was weird, I still enjoyed more than half of it, and I liked the themes and I liked what it did, and yes, it was weird, but I enjoyed it. And so I thought, oh, even if this book is weird, I'll still probably enjoy it, right? Wrong. This book is about a man called Eiji, who goes to Japan from the remote Japanese island where he lives in order to try and find his father, who has never been in his life and he's never met him. So he sets out on this quest to meet him for the first time. And his journey is filled with these ridiculous, insane things and people, and it's part mystery, part sci-fi, part mafia story, part completely weird surrealism. Because half of the book is following Eiji and his journey to find his dad, and then half of it is just like random other things. So each chapter slash part flips between Eiji's story and then something else. And sometimes the something else was like quite straightforward, flashbacks to Eiji's childhood. That was one instance. But all of the other ones were just so bizarre. One of them, it would cut between Eiji's story and then like a surrealist collection of short stories following, if I remember correctly, I'm probably not because it was too weird, a goat in like a post-apocalyptic world looking for his friend the chicken. And I was like, why the fuck is that in this book? And it was just all so weird, and not in a way I liked, unfortunately, even for David Mitchell. And I just didn't see the point of this narrative choice. And I wasn't particularly interested or invested in our protagonist's story either. So this book was just a massive slog to get through and ended up being very disappointing because it's the first David Mitchell book I have read that I would just call kind of bad. Next is Bloodlust and Bonnets by Emily McGovern. This is a graphic novel set in Regency England, and it follows our protagonist Lucy, Lord Byron, and a bounty hunter named Sham on a quest to hunt down high society's most notorious vampire. And that sounds really fun, and I remembered it being quite fun because it was actually a reread for me. And it's silly and irreverent, and it has vampires and a magical castle and a telepathic eagle called Napoleon. But the problems I had with it this time around were, number one, the ridiculous, irreverent tone it had was unrelenting and very grating after a while. 2, the pacing felt really weird. There'd be points where like several panels were dedicated to a moment that did not need that much time or attention dedicated to it. And then in other places it would feel like things were skipping around so quickly that panels or whole pages were missing from the story. And number 3 is the character of Sham, who repeatedly refuses to like say where in the gender binary they identify, as in people ask them, oh, is it Miss Sham or Mr. Sham? And they're like, no. And then someone else asks later, oh, are you a man or a woman? And Sham's like, yes. Like, it's very obvious and it's very explicit that they don't identify as male or female, but everybody else in the book calls them she and her, and it just felt icky. And it was such a weird choice that I just couldn't get behind. And I didn't remember that from the first time I read it, so clearly I wasn't paying enough attention then. But yeah, this was disappointing because I decided to reread it because I thought it would be fun and enjoyable, and it just ended up so much worse than I remembered. Next we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and this one breaks my heart because I really thought I was going to enjoy this book a lot. This is about a tiny coffee shop in Tokyo where if you go along and you sit in a specific seat and obey a couple of other rules, you can travel back in time. And so in this book we follow 4 different characters traveling in time in this way, and unfortunately for me, the very first character that you follow I just found incredibly annoying and whiny, and so the first 25% of the book was hard to get through because I really did not like this character that we were spending all this time and attention on. And by the time I'd got past that first quarter of the book, I was then realising that I didn't really like the style of writing, or the style of translation I should say. The language in this book is very simple but quite repetitive in a way that I also found quite annoying. And so while everyone else was able to really emotionally connect to the characters and get really invested in them and what they were trying to achieve through traveling in time, I just couldn't really do that. I found it all a bit annoying and then tedious by the end. And so the big emotional crescendo at the end of this book didn't really have much effect on me, and I ended up giving this 2 stars. Next is Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson, and which was actually a book I'd wanted to read for quite a long time before I actually read it in 2021. This is a contemporary mystery about a girl called Claudia, whose best friend Monday vanishes. She seems to vanish off the face of the earth, and Claudia seems to be the only person who notices and cares. And I tend to really like reading mysteries, and I was really interested in this one. It had such a cool premise, but obviously from the fact it ended up on my most disappointing list, it did not live up to what I had hoped it would. I think that the core mystery about what happened to Monday, what actually happened to her, was good, and I think the twist solution at the end was fine. It was just unfortunately very watered down by everything else about the book that I really didn't enjoy. This is a YA book with a teenage protagonist, so I couldn't expect it to be incredibly mature and grown up feeling, but even still, Claudia was so young and childish. There's not really any other way to describe her. And sometimes that worked, admittedly, to show how helpless and powerless she was in the face of this mystery, because she's the only person that is trying to solve it, but she's not really able to by herself. But mostly I found it very frustrating and annoying, and I did not enjoy reading this entire book from her perspective. Because this book was also quite long, I think a bit longer than it needed to be, and it also had quite a lot of time jumps, and normally I'm very good at following time jumps and appreciating their need and how the story is structured through the use of time jumps. But in this book, it was just a bit confusing and unnecessary. We did not need that many confusing periods that we were jumping between. They were labelled confusingly, made it hard to follow. And at the very end of the book, there is this reveal of a trope, it turns out, I really hate. I'm gonna put it on screen here in a second, so if you don't want to be spoiled, look away now. Okay, spoilers done. Yeah, I really hated that bit. So unfortunately, this book was kind of a massive waste of time for me. And then finally, on my most disappointing books is Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. This is a dystopian fantasy book, I would say. It's set in the world where Cinderella's story really did happen. Cinderella was a real person and she met her prince, etc, etc. But now it's 200 years after that happened, and that piece of history has resulted in this very traditional and strict and patriarchal, slightly dystopian version of society, where a girl has 3 chances to attend 3 royal balls, I think one a year when she turns 16 or something like this, and she has those 3 balls to try and find a husband there, and if she doesn't, something bad happens. I can't really remember what, they get killed or they get banished or something like this, and that's an interesting premise. But I think what this book failed to do was deliver on really any of it. I just wanted it to be more of everything. I wanted more interesting characters, a more developed plot, more world building in general. I thought the whole thing was a bit shallow and superficial. I think the villain was completely unbelievable and cartoonish and not that scary at all. The ending of the book was very rushed and I think poorly executed, and actually the pacing wasn't great throughout the entire thing. The first third of the book was very, very slow and I almost gave up on it. And honestly, looking back now and seeing what I thought of the end result, I probably should have. So now let's get even more negative and talk about the 2 books I am considering my worst books of 2021. Firstly is American Royals by Catherine McGee. And this could also take a place on the most disappointing books as well, so you know, it's an equal contender in both lists. This is set in a world like our world, except that instead of George Washington becoming the first president of the US, he became the first king. So in this version of our world, there is a monarchy in America. And so we follow 4 characters who are wrapped up in this somehow. We've got the Crown Princess, who is the oldest child and is going to become queen one day. We follow the second princess. We follow the second princess's best friend, who is in love with the prince. And then we follow the prince's ex-girlfriend. And all of those characters are so shallow and unconvincing. The whole book is shallow and superficial and dumb in, I think, every way possible. And I read this because I was hoping for something at least a little bit similar to Red, White and Royal Blue, which I reread in 2021 and loved again. But this book was so bad, and if I'd had a physical version of this book, I may well have just thrown it out the window when I finished it. It was so dreadful. And then we have my one and luckily only 1-star book I read last year, which was Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. Let me just say that now, all these months later, I can see why people liked this. And while it does boggle my mind slowly that some people have said this was their like favourite or one of their top 10 reads of 2021, I can see why they have that opinion. It has not changed mine at all. And one of the good things about this book is that some of the topics it talks about are interesting. I'll give it that. It talks about like the pressures of society and living in a very traditional and conservative society, and what it can feel like to be sort of a bit rejected by that because you don't fit in like you want to or like other people want you to, and the impact of that and what it's like to not have a life or not want a life that other people would consider acceptable or normal. But I do think that all of these topics were also addressed in the other Sayaka Murata book I've read, Convenience Store Woman, which I actually really liked. So if you're interested in those topics, go read Convenience Store Woman. Do not waste your time on Earthlings. I guess also if you like being surprised by books, even if it's negatively, then I'd maybe recommend this book. But honestly, it's 250 pages long and I deeply detested about 235 of those pages. And the list of things I hated is quite long, but can be summed up nicely as child abuse, incest, child sexual assault, and cannibalism. What more could you ask for? I was physically disgusted by this book. I think it well deserves the 1 star I gave it and nothing more. And I'm honestly amazed that I even finished it, to be honest. There's not much more to say. I hated it. Hated it. But those are all of the negatives done at last. Let's talk about some of the things I liked. Starting with some particularly surprising books of 2021. And these 2 most surprising books are also 2 of my best books of the year. So we're going to start with Slade House by David Mitchell. This was surprising because I loved it, despite the fact that the David Mitchell book I read before this was obviously Number 9 Dream, which really lowered my expectations for future David Mitchell books. This is a, it's hard to describe the genre, sci-fi / fantasy / paranormal book about a house called Slade House, which every 9 years abducts someone. And obviously there's a lot more to it than that, but I really, really loved this book. I think it was a great return to form from David Mitchell. I now think that Number 9 Dream was just like a random blip on his otherwise very good writing record. Slade House, it's very short. I think it's like 280 pages. I pretty much inhaled this book. I was really loving literally every second of it. It is so twisty and interesting and compelling, and I'm still thinking about it a lot. all these months later. I would recommend this to you if you like David Mitchell books, if you've never read a David Mitchell book before, if you like slightly weird, speculative, magical realism kind of things, I think you might like this. If you like reading about like creepy, haunted houses, I would recommend this to you as well. This was just excellent. And then next on my most surprising books of 2021, we have The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This is also surprising because my previous experience with this author did not go so well, but this one was really, really excellent. I had previously read from Stuart Turton his first book, The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Found it very, very disappointing, so yeah, did not have high hopes for this. This is a murder mystery set in the 1600s on a big ol' ship going on the very long journey back to Amsterdam, and it was just so good. It was so good. Lots of creepy, unexplained things start happening on board this ship. There's talk of a devil maybe being about. The characters are great. It has this really oppressive gothic atmosphere that I really, really enjoyed. The mystery at the center of this is so well plotted and crafted, and like the way it's slowly revealed to the reader, also absolutely brilliant. This was just a delight to read, basically, and it's not a short book. It's not a short book, but it maintains this level of brilliance the entire way through. And when I was reading this, all I wanted to do each day was wake up and read this book. So now on to the rest of my best reads of 2021. I'm going to give a few honourable mentions to rereads I did during the year. You'll see in my reading stats video that actually out of all of the books I read in 2021, exactly a third of them were rereads. And so to start off with, like I already said, is Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey Christen. This is a romance between a prince of England and the son of the American president. 5 stars, again, loved it. And next is Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funke. This is a kid's book about a dragon, obviously, and his friends, and they are traveling across the world to try and find a new home for the dragons. And this was just wonderful, just as wonderful and magical and enchanting as I remember it being. I reread this as like a childhood comfort read, and it absolutely fulfilled that. It's really, really great. Next is the Monstrous graphic novel series, which I mentioned in my video on this topic last year, because I also reread it last year because I pretty much reread this every year, it seems to be, and I'm not mad because I love it. This is by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. I reread the first 3 volumes this year. It's great. It is set in a high fantasy steampunk matriarchal world where our main character Micah is this young girl who has like this dark, incredibly powerful power inside her, and she has to work out what it is and what to do with it. And I love this graphic novel series so much. I talk about it all the time. And the last reread I want to talk about is The Encyclopedia of Early Earth by Isabel Greenberg. It's amazing. It is inspired by mythology and folklore. There is a storyteller traveling, I think, from the North Pole to the South Pole and gathering and telling stories, and it's full of stories within stories, and I gave it 5 stars on this reread. It's absolutely amazing, very emotional and surprisingly bittersweet. So on to the last 2 books that I would consider the best books of 2021. Again, these are ones I read for the first time this year, starting with The Girl Who Smiled Beads by Clementine Wamaria. This is a memoir about the author's time during the Rwandan Civil War and the Rwandan genocide, and the, I think, 6 years she and her sister spent as refugees traveling through, I think, 7 or 8 different African countries before finally going to the US and trying to start a new life there. So it tells the story of both her early childhood as a refugee and then also her life after she arrived in America, I think when she was 13 years old. It doesn't just stop there, it tells you a lot about what happened afterwards, like all the way up to her life as an adult when she decided to start writing this memoir. And it's hard to describe this book without using like all of the cliched buzzwords, but you know what, this book is powerful and emotional and shocking and important and heartbreaking, and if there's any book that I read in 2021 that deserves to genuinely be called all of those adjectives, it is this one. I would recommend this whether you read a lot of non-fiction or not. I just think this is an amazing book that a lot more people should be reading and talking about. And then finally onto what has to be my favourite book overall that I read in 2021, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. That's right, we're flashing back to 2015, where everyone was reading this book and putting it on all of their favourite books of the year lists. Because I finally read it now and I finally love it. That's really all there is to say about this. It is set in the same world as the author's Grisha series. This is about 6 characters who get together to do an impossible heist. And it's like perfect. It's perfect in every way, pretty much. I would say that the characters are definitely the most perfect bit of this book. And it sounds dumb to say that because, like, yeah, this is such a popular book. I feel like even if you haven't read it, you've seen someone else talk about it on BookTube and they've probably said how much they love the characters. So again, it's a slight cliche to say, oh, the characters are really amazing in Six of Crows, but they were. My favourite character was probably Kaz. Again, not an unpopular opinion, just because he is a very, very clever character and is always like planning and is 2 steps ahead of everyone in a way that is very enjoyable to read about. I have not yet read the sequel, Crooked Kingdom, because to be honest, I don't want the story to end. I want to follow these characters and live in Ketterdam for like as long as I can, so I'm not really in a rush at the moment to finish this duology. Also, maybe slightly because I have been spoiled on quite a lot of it. Again, this book is super popular. It's been out for many years, so the perils of scrolling through like Bookstagram memes is that you're probably gonna get spoiled on Crooked Kingdom, probably like a major character death. So I know pretty much everything, well, not pretty much everything. I know quite a lot of how things will end in Crooked Kingdom, but yeah. Anyway, Six of Crows is amazing. I love it with all of my body and soul. It's incredible. 10 out of 5 stars. The best thing I read in 2021. Six of Crows. And so those were all of my best, worst, most surprising and most disappointing reads of 2021. Did you spot any of your favourites or least favourites in here? Did I have the complete opposite opinion to you on any of them? I would genuinely like to find out. Thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in my next one. Bye!